welcome to another video. In my previous video, I created a reverb effect for this module here, the Lowenzahnhonig by wgdmodular. If you like reverb and haven't checked that video out, you may want to check it out. So since then, I have taken the knowledge from developing the reverb effect, and I've created a stereo delay effect for this module. Just a quick refresher, the Lowenzahnhonig module runs a daisy seed microcontroller from Electrosmith behind the scenes. And we can write code for that microcontroller in C++, compile it and then push it onto the seed, and then we could basically interact with that custom firmware using the module. While developing the stereo delay effects, I learned quite a lot about delay effects in general in terms of the theory and what they're used for. So in this video, we're going to start with a little bit of theory on delay effects in general. Then we're going to dive into the delay effect I've created for this module. And then after that, we'll go through a number of different patches using all of the theory from earlier in the video. If you want to jump around, feel free. I will put time markers in the comments at the bottom. So stick around and let's have some fun. Let's get started with some theory. So it all starts with the audio input, and here I'm just showing a simple impulse. That audio input gets split into two different paths. So one is the dry path, so essentially the original audio input, and then a copy of that goes into the delay line. Within the delay line, we simply get one repeat of the audio input after delay time, the delay time parameter, and that's normally set using milliseconds or divisions of something. Those two paths get merged together using a dry-wet control, and then that goes to the audio output. So at 0% dry, we just hear the dry path. At 100%, we just hear the delay line. And then at exactly 50-50, both the dry path and the delay line have the same amplitude. We also have a feedback path. And the feedback path is simply routing the audio output back into the input at an amplitude set by the feedback knob. So if we have the feedback knob set to 0, we simply hear the one repeat, the one echo from the delay line. However, when we set the feedback to something other than 0, then we hear more than one echo. If we have the feedback set to infinite, then essentially we would create an infinite loop. We could remove the audio input and that sound would keep going round and round. So what does that look like visually? So if we plot this over time, so time moving from the left to the right, we have the original audio going into this circuit. After delay time, milliseconds, we will hear one repeat. And if the feedback is set to 0, then the job's done. However, if the feedback is set to something other than 0, then we will hear repeats of that echo. So essentially, we tweak all three of these values, the delay time, the feedback amplitude, and then the dry-wet control to get different flavors of delay depending on what it is that we want to do. So what can you actually do with this effect? Well, using another chart, we can just plot in different places different types of delay effect. So we have delay time at the bottom, so in milliseconds, and then we have the feedback on the left-hand side there. Now, one of the things you can do is Karplus strong synthesis. And this is an interesting one. So what we do here is we excite the delay line buffer with something like noise or something like that. And then we set the delay time really, really short. So the delay time actually causes repeats within an audible range. So somewhere between 20 times per second and 20,000 times per second. And we actually synthesize a new type of sound in doing that. Karplus strong often sounds at higher pitches like a plucked string, sometimes sounds like bells. And at lower pitches, we can get quite a grungy sort of bass sound, which is quite nice. If you have heard of, you probably have, I'm sure, the mutable instruments rings module, and then you've definitely heard Karplus strong synthesis. Another type of delay effect is slapback, and you will have heard this on certainly 1950s records. I think it came out around the 1950s. This is a delay time of between 40 and 120 milliseconds, and often with very low feedback, sometimes zero, so one echo, and sometimes just two or three. And that gives a nice character to a particular sound, often drums, often vocals. And this delay time is often used in lots of guitar effects, certainly tape delay effects. Somewhere in between that, so very low delay time in terms of milliseconds, but much higher than Karplus strong, we can use that to thicken a sound. So our ears and brain will perceive that as not an echo, not a repeat, but of a sort of elongation of the sound. So we can use that to add body to any sound really. Often vocals it sounds good on, sometimes drums, often synths as well. We can also create spatial effects in this area. So anytime up until maybe sort of 20, 30 milliseconds by having a different delay time within left and right channels in a stereo effect. Moving higher up in delay times, we get into rhythmic delay territory. Rhythmic because essentially we can set the delay times in multiples of beats in particular BPMs. So for example, one quarter note beat at 120 BPM, there is 500 milliseconds in between those. So we can set the delay time to 500 milliseconds and then we will hear an echo every quarter note. And of course we can tweak that. So we can half that and then we'll hear it to 250 milliseconds. And then we'll hear an echo every eighth note and then half again to 125 milliseconds. And then we will hear an echo, a repeat every 16th note. Once we go beyond this area, we get into what I would probably call spatial effects. And this is where we have a lot of fun. So anything over about a second in terms of delay time, we can get some interesting effects there. Sometimes using drones. So as we change the effects of the drone, we might hear an echo or echoes of that seconds later. And also by increasing feedback, we can get some very special and spatial effects. So let's get started learning about the delay module, and then we'll play around with some patches using these examples here. So let's walk through some of the controls using a sound source. So I have a piano sound here. Let's hear it fully dry. Okay, and we'll set the dry wet to 50% just so we can hear both the original sound source and the repeats at the same amplitude. So without any inputs here at all, the delay time is set to about 0.4 of a second, so 400 milliseconds. The feedback is set all the way down, so we'll hear just one repeat. And as we go to the left, we can get different divisions, so the delay time will get shorter. Shorter again. All the way down to divide by 8. We're into that sort of slapback territory here. If we increase the feedback a little bit. That'll last forever. So finally the Smoodge control. So let's put it into a low value and we'll just hear the stereo spread. So off, and then on. As we increase that, we can hear the echoes becoming more and more out of phase. And you might be able to hear that whoa and flutter and tremolo effect creeping in now. So here we have a Karplus strong synthesis patch. So we have some noise coming from the source of Unker here from nonlinear circuits. This is great because we have three different types of noise that we can play with. So we have low frequency noise, we have flat, and we have some high frequency noise. That's going into VCA here, the Lowenzahnhonig by wgdmodular. And we are sending a really short square gate into the CV control here. So just sending a tiny amount of noise into the module. And then here we can see the input here. So let's start that gate sequence going into the CV control here. So you can hear a short burst of noise. And we have the delay time, the clock, set by a square wave VCO. And that is running at a really high rate. So as we increase the feedback, we'll notice that click sound disappear, and then we'll hear the Karplus strong kick in. There we go. There's the dry wet controller. So at some point it starts to ring out. And the pitch is set by the delay time. So if we increase the delay time, we can also affect the sound. We can change the sustain using feedback, and we can change the sound by the type of noise that we're sending in. So that's low frequency noise. We get a bit more randomness there, and then the high frequency, I quite like the low frequency because it gives us variation. Let's try some different tones. Notice the spatial effect, the stereo widening effect as we increase that. So off, increase now. Makes everything sound good. Making it a bit higher, we get a slight chorusy effect. That sounds cool. That sounds cool. Wonky bass line. Even lower. Now we're in the drone noise territory, aren't we? also change the pitch by sending pitch 1 volt per octave into the square wave oscillator that's driving the delay time. So in this patch, going back to the piano sound again, we will play around with some lower delay times to create that sort of spatial effect or to add some body to the sound. So this is the dry sound. You can hear a tiny amount of reverb there as well. This white cable here is the clock coming from the Arturia key step, just out of shot here. And we can play around with different clock divisions, different feedback times, and different dry-wet balances, and of course different levels of the Smoodge control to get some nice effects that thicken the sound and add a lot of body to it. Increasing the delay time now. So next we'll try drums into the delay module. We'll use a low delay time and we'll play around with sort of slap back style effects, and we'll give it an effect that's a little bit like a spring reverb, and then we'll play around with the feedback to get variations between spring reverb and then a beat repeat style effect. So 100% dry. So next we'll push some vocals through the delay effect. We have two samples here from freesound.org. This one here from Jenna01 and this one here from Matt C. So we'll loop through them and then we'll try some different settings here. We'll start off with short delay times to add body. We'll add stereo spread and width to the sound using the spatial effects provided by the Smoodge control. And then we'll try different blends of the feedback and the dry wet, just to get a feel for what it's adding and the intensity of the effect. After that we'll go up in delay time, and then we'll get into the special effect area and see how that sounds.
I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want it to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors, I want wanted to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors. I don't want your metaphors. I wanted to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors. I wanted to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors. I wanted to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors. I wanted to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors. I wanted to be all yours. I don't want your metaphors. I wanted to be all yours. 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 To be all yours.
Next, we'll move into the sort of rhythmic territory where we will use delay times, which are divisions or equal to or multiplications of the clock. So I have a sequence here that I'll play on the Arturia key step, and then we'll play around with some delay times. We'll start with rhythmic style effects, maybe a little bit like The Edge or Pink Floyd, and then we'll move into the spatial territory. Notice how the sound changes when I increase the smooge. Notice how the stereo width, it gets really wide and sounds really cool. And then as we go into the higher settings, we get that whoa and flutter, we get some saturation. And as we go even higher, that stereo tremolo effect kicks in. In this patch, we will play a slow melody on nano rings here. It's being modulated slightly by the harmonic LFOs rung on the Allen Synthesis EuroPi. A little bit later on, we will introduce some modulation to the feedback parameter using a second channel from the harmonic LFOs. So here we will play around with Rhythmic, sort of the Edge Pink Floyd style, sort of slapback delay with a longer delay time. And then we'll play around with feedback and Smoodge, and we'll get into the special effects territory. Pay attention to the Smoodge control. When it goes pretty low, we'll get that nice spatial effect, and then when it goes up pretty high, we'll get some of those weird and wonderful tape effects. So let's get started. So there you have it, the Lowenzahnhonig from wgdmodular. If you'd like to get hold of one of these modules, you can reach out to wgdmodular on Facebook or Instagram. If you would like to see the code for this delay effect, check the links down below. And if you would like to get hold of the firmware, this delay firmware effect for the module, you can get that from the wgdmodular website, or you can get hold of it using the GitHub link down below. Thanks for watching.